In 1986, an entire region in Cameroon went to sleep beside a quiet, volcanic lake. By morning, 1,746 people were dead. There had been no explosion, no earthquake, no fire racing through the villages, nothing that sounded like a disaster. Instead, something far stranger happened. During the night, the lake released a massive cloud of invisible gas that flowed silently down the surrounding valleys. It moved through homes across fields and into small farming villages where families were sleeping. People didn't wake up to panic. They didn't run. Most never even knew something was wrong. Farmers were later found collapsed beside their beds. Entire households were discovered exactly where they had fallen asleep. Livestock lay motionless across the hillsides as if time had simply stopped. The air itself had become deadly. What makes this disaster even more unsettling is how ordinary the place looked. Lake Nyos sat high in the mountains of northwestern Cameroon, surrounded by fertile valleys where thousands of farmers had built their lives. To anyone living there, the land looked calm, stable, and safe. But hidden beneath that quiet lake was a pressure system building for decades, and when it finally released, the disaster that followed would become one of the strangest natural catastrophes ever recorded. Lake Nyos sits in the highlands of northwestern Cameroon, more than 1,000 meters above sea level inside the collapsed crater of an ancient volcano. From above it looks peaceful, a dark blue lake surrounded by steep green slopes and fertile farmland. For generations, farmers settled in the valleys below it. The volcanic soil was rich, crops grew easily, and water from nearby streams fed small villages scattered along the narrow valley floors. To the people who lived there, the land felt protected. The surrounding hills blocked strong winds, the climate was mild, and the lake above them seemed calm and unchanging. But the landscape had one hidden feature that no one recognized as dangerous. The lake sat inside a steep volcanic bowl, and only one narrow outlet cut through the crater rim. Beyond that opening, the terrain dropped sharply into a network of tight valleys where most of the villages were built. Anything heavy spilling over the edge of the crater would have nowhere else to go. Those valleys would force it downhill, straight into the homes of the people sleeping below. And deep beneath the lake's quiet surface, the conditions for exactly that kind of disaster had already been forming for decades. Far below the calm surface of Lake Nyos, the water is layered in a way most lakes are not. At the top, the water mixes with wind and temperature changes. But deeper down, hundreds of meters below the surface, the lake becomes dense cold and almost completely isolated. At those depths, the pressure is enormous, nearly 300 pounds per square inch, comparable to the pressure inside industrial hydraulic systems. And under that pressure, something unusual had been happening for decades. Lake Nyos sits on top of a region of ancient volcanic activity. Deep underground, small amounts of magmatic carbon dioxide slowly leak upward through cracks in the rock. Normally, gas escaping from underground simply bubbles to the surface and disappears into the atmosphere. But in Lake Nyos, the extreme pressure at the bottom forced that carbon dioxide to dissolve into the deep water instead. Year after year, decade after decade, the deeper layers of the lake were slowly turning into something very dangerous, a massive reservoir of compressed gas trapped underwater. Imagine a gigantic bottle of soda sealed tightly and shaken continuously for years. As long as the pressure remains stable, the gas stays dissolved. But if that pressure is suddenly disturbed, the gas begins to escape violently. And once that process starts, it feeds on itself. The rising bubbles reduce pressure even more, releasing even more gas, accelerating the reaction until the entire system erupts. Sometime around 9:30 p.m. on August 21st, something inside Lake Nyos disturbed that deep water layer. Scientists still debate what the trigger might have been.
Sleep
A
now,
small
little
landslide
one.
beneath the lake,
It is
a
late.
sudden cold rainstorm, or a subtle shift in the water column itself. But whatever the cause, the moment that deep water began to rise, the lake was already past the point where the disaster could be stopped. On the evening of August the 21st, 1986, the villages around Lake Nyos were settling into an ordinary night. Oil lamps flickered inside mud brick homes. The sound of insects filled the warm valley air. Families finished dinner and prepared to sleep, just as they had done thousands of nights before. Near the shoreline of the lake lived a cattle herder named Hale Lima. That evening, Hale Lima had gathered her animals close to the house as darkness spread across the valley. Her relatives lived nearby, and together their homes formed a small cluster at the base of the hills. Around them stood hundreds of cattle, the wealth and livelihood of the entire family. To Hale Lima, the lake above them was simply part of the landscape. It had always been there, quiet and distant inside the dark crater walls. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. Several kilometers away, deeper inside one of the valleys, another man was finishing his day. His name was Joseph Nquine. Joseph Nquine was a truck driver from the village of Subo. That night he sat at a small table inside his home while his young daughter worked beside him under the dim light of a kerosene lamp. She was finishing her homework before bed, and Joseph Nquine was helping her with the last few lines. Outside their house, the valley was calm. The air was still. Across the region, thousands of other families were doing the same quiet things, talking softly, closing their doors, preparing to sleep. No alarms sounded. No strange lights appeared in the sky. The lake above them remained completely silent. But deep beneath the dark water of Lake Nyos, something had already begun to move. And as the pressure inside the lake started to break, an invisible wave of gas was beginning to rise toward the surface, carrying with it a disaster that neither Hale Lima nor Joseph Nquine could possibly see coming. As the deep water inside Lake Nyos began rising, the pressure holding the dissolved gas in place started to collapse. The moment that pressure dropped, the carbon dioxide trapped in the water erupted out of solution. What happened next unfolded with brutal speed. The lake behaved like a gigantic bottle of soda that had just been violently opened. Gas burst upward through the water, driving a massive column toward the surface. Investigators later estimated that a fountain of water may have shot nearly 90 meters into the air, towering above the crater walls in the darkness. But the water itself was not the real danger. In seconds, the lake released an enormous volume of carbon dioxide, somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 tons of gas. And unlike most gases, carbon dioxide is heavier than air. It does not rise. It flows.
Has anyone seen my daughter?
The cloud spilled over the low edge of the crater like an invisible liquid and began pouring down the surrounding valleys. Through the darkness, it moved silently, spreading outward at speeds fast enough to outrun anyone on foot. When the gas reached the lowlands where the villages stood, it slipped through doorways and windows, filling houses from the ground upward. Inside the valleys where Joseph Nquine lived, the air was already changing. Inside the homes near the lake where Hale Lima slept, the invisible cloud was already arriving. There was no color, no warning smell, no sound to wake the people inside their houses. Just a silent current of gas moving downhill through the night. And within minutes, the air across the valleys surrounding Lake Nyos had become deadly. By the time the gas cloud finished moving through the valleys, the scale of the disaster was almost impossible to comprehend. Across the region surrounding Lake Nyos, 1,746 people were dead. More than 3,000 livestock, cattle, goats, and other animals lay scattered across the fields and village roads. Entire farming communities had been silenced in a single night. Many of the victims were found exactly where they had been moments before the gas arrived. Some collapsed beside their beds. Others were discovered along the valley paths as if they had tried to step outside before suddenly losing consciousness. Running made the situation even worse. When people sensed something was wrong and tried to escape, their bodies demanded faster breathing. Each deep breath pulled in more carbon dioxide, accelerating the loss of oxygen in the bloodstream. In some villages, entire households were lost. But survival that night followed a strange and cruel pattern. In one rural clinic located along the valley, people sleeping on the ground floor never woke up. Yet those on the second floor survived. Just one level higher above the ground, barely a few meters, was enough to remain above the densest part of the gas cloud. In the weeks that followed, scientists arrived at Lake Nyos to understand how a quiet crater lake could produce such a deadly event. Their investigations confirmed something extremely rare, a limnic eruption, a sudden release of massive amounts of dissolved gas from deep lake water. At Lake Nyos, decades of volcanic carbon dioxide had accumulated silently under immense pressure until one disturbance triggered the catastrophic release. Today, large degassing pipes stand in the lake, slowly releasing carbon dioxide from the depths to prevent another buildup. But the disaster revealed something unsettling about the natural world. The air around us feels constant, reliable, safe. Yet on one quiet night in Cameroon, a lake changed that assumption, and thousands of people learned too late that sometimes the most dangerous disasters on Earth arrive without sound, without warning, and without anyone seeing them coming.